that's fine. But I don't want to see any cell phones, okay? So during the kind of lecture or any independent activity, no cell phones. And then, Corinne, I'm going to ask you if that's okay while I'm teaching. Okay. Where we left off last semester, we started talking about the foundations of the Gilded Age. The Gilded Age time period is 1877, so the end of Reconstruction through, it's technically, like the end date is ambiguous, but we'll say through the late 1880s. But you could say this really lasts until around 1900. The Gilded Age, the term gilded means that it looks really good on the outside, but if you start digging a little bit deeper, things are not what they seem. So during the Gilded Age, it really looks like America is experiencing this great economic growth, and industrialization is bringing lots of jobs, and we have mass immigration, which is supplying the factories with workers. We have people moving out west who are starting farms and producing agriculture for the country. But there are a lot of social problems that exist kind of underneath. Now, we already talked about all of these things that I'm going to rush through at the beginning, but just to kind of recap for you. The term gilded is coined by Mark Twain. It means that it looks good on the outside, but it's really rotten on the inside. The characteristics of this age are rapid industrialization, meaning that factories are being built very quickly. We turn from kind of what we call like the home sphere or the domestic sphere to people working outside of the home, people producing goods that we can sell like on a larger scale. Now, prior to the Gilded Age, much of what we sold internationally is going to be agricultural products, or some cotton, some tobacco, rice, indigo, that kind of stuff. We do start to produce our own fabrics that we're going to sell, or textiles, but we're going to ramp this up big time during the Gilded Age. We're going to see the growth of business, and with the growth of business, we're really going to ingrain the idea of capitalism, and that our system or our economic policy is capitalism. We see mass immigration, first from Western Europe, places like France, Germany, Spain, and then we're going to see it more from Eastern Europe, countries that are closer to the Soviet Union, non-English speaking people who practice different religions, particularly Catholics, and that's going to cause some social unrest. Because so many people are moving to the United States, and because all of these factories are open, we have rapid urbanization, meaning that we go from being pretty spread out with just a few city centers to having a lot of these big major cities, cities like New York, Chicago, St. Louis, New Orleans. All of these kind of cities that existed before are going to become these huge mega cities, and we're going to see new big industrial cities pop up as well. And then there is corruption in politics, particularly the use of money to buy politicians and buy political favors, which is going to allow the business people, the capitalists, the entrepreneurs to take advantage of the everyday average American to make themselves wealthier. We talked about the industrialists, the capitalists, which were entrepreneurs. An entrepreneur is just somebody who takes their own money and their own idea and they invest it in a business. If you are, I'll use Jeff Bezos as an example. In the 1990s, he decides that he wants to open an online bookstore, which is Amazon. And that then transforms into this mega corporation that right now I could get on Amazon and order, dog food. And when I get home today, it'll be on my front doorstep. That's an entrepreneur, somebody who takes their own money or their own idea and they create a business. In a capitalist economy, if you are a person who comes up with an idea and creates a business, you get to keep the profits of that business. And we see that really deeply ingrained in the Gilded Age. We talked about Andrew Carnegie, okay? You don't have to know everything there is to know about Andrew Carnegie. You need to know that Carnegie creates a steel company, Carnegie Steel. The steel company is going to be one of the driving forces of industrialization. He discovers a process to make steel called the Bessemer process, and we already had a process to make steel. The Bessemer process makes steel faster and more efficiently, so now we can build really tall buildings, we can build railroad tracks, and he has kind of a monopoly on steel. So all of the industrialization he is profiting from. He doesn't treat his workers all too well. They work 12-hour shifts, they don't make very much money, so he really exploits their labor. And he does not allow labor unions to come in and organize for better working conditions. He is a philanthropist though. He writes a book towards the end of his life called The Gospel of Wealth. And the Gospel of Wealth basically said that it wasn't the job of the rich to give charity to the poor. Instead, it was the job of the rich to give the poor a ladder on which they could climb themselves. So he believed that rather than giving money to people, give them the tools they need to be successful. He really puts a lot of money, particularly into public libraries, because education is power. Education is a way to kind of climb the social ladder. He also helps to build several universities. John D. Rockefeller. Rockefeller is the tycoon of the Standard Oil Company. One way that I tell my on-level students to remember John D. Rockefeller, or what he was known for, is that we have to drill through rock to get to oil. Okay, so if you can put rock and oil together, when you see Rockefeller's name, help you know that he's an oil guy. Rockefeller creates an oil monopoly with the Standard Oil Company. He basically goes into communities and he buys out or pressures the smaller oil businesses to sell to him. The reason this becomes a problem is because...
Attention jackets. The JPH shuttle leaves in 6 minutes. Please proceed to the back horseshoe.
Is because, like other entrepreneurs, he exploits the people that work for him. And if he goes into a community and they refuse to sell the company to him, their own oil company, then he will acquire it through pressure, through economic pressure. And then once he acquires the company, he basically get rid of everybody that works there. So it was basically those smaller companies that were profiting, making money, they were doing well for themselves, were forced to sell out to this big oil tycoon. His workers, he does pay them fair wages, and he gives them bonuses and vacations. They still work long hours. And the other thing to remember about really anybody working in the Gilded Age is that there are no worker protections. Okay, so if you get hurt on the job, or you can't go to work because you're sick, whatever, and you just don't have a job, they just replace you with somebody else. That's going to be a condition that has to be addressed later on. He gives money to universities, and he set up free public high schools. Now, when we say free high school, we're not talking about high school that everybody can go to. In this time period, only boys are going to school. Henry Ford, we know from Ford Automobile. Ford is probably one of the industrialists that does treat his workers right, does give them fair hours. We can actually thank Ford for the fact that we only work 8 hours a day. Some industries it's still 12, but that we only work a 40-hour work week. Ford believed that the people that worked for him should be able to take the money that they make and be able to purchase his car, be able to live a life that was, live a life that they're not struggling. So he paid well. His workers worked 8 or 10-hour days or 40-hour work weeks, and he paid them enough that 3 months' salary would buy them a Ford automobile. That's not possible in today's economy because the price of automobiles is so much more expensive. He also believed in creating a car for the common man. Prior to Ford actually came from, or got his idea from another automobile manufacturer, and the name of it's kind of escaping me right now. But prior to Ford, the only people that could afford a car were the rich. So he thought, why don't I create a vehicle that everybody can drive? He does this, he makes his cars affordable through the assembly line. Okay, and the assembly line production means that you don't have to hire somebody who can build the entire car. You just need to hire people who can stand in one place all day and do the same thing over and over. For instance, it's your job all day long to put the wheel on the car. That's all you do. Every car that rolls by you, you just put the wheel on the car. The next person tightens the lug nuts and so on. He perfects the assembly line to where he can push out a car. I think it's like every 4 seconds, a car is rolling off of a Ford assembly line. So he gets really good at it. Other industries are going to adopt this method of manufacturing later on, kind of 1910s, 1920s. J.P. Morgan, do y'all remember what he was? Anybody remember? He was a bank, okay? If your parents or you have a Chase bank account, Chase's full name is J.P. Morgan Chase. J.P. Morgan is a financier. He has tons of money. He loans it out to people. He makes his money on the interest that they have to pay him back. He acquires his wealth in banking and steel. He forms trusts. And a trust is essentially a monopoly, but it's a monopoly of companies working together. So these trusts, he would get the steel industry would be working together with the oil industry, would be working together with the railroad industry. They would all be controlling whatever services they needed to control to keep the prices what they wanted them to be and to make themselves super, super wealthy. He pays his workers very low wages in the steel industry. He has unsafe working conditions, and he puts down unions or troublemakers, as he calls them. Anyone who's trying to get better working conditions or better pay, he roots them out. He's one of those that lives a pretty lavish lifestyle. I think we looked at some of these pictures before we left out on Christmas break, where he lives in a mansion, while the people that work for him often live in tenements or in these really small apartments.
Oh, he had that train car.
Yeah, he had the private train car that was like decked out in velvet, and if you were an everyday average person, a commoner, you weren't riding in luxury like that. Yes. For his steel industry, when he bought part of the steel industry, they were working in the steel factories. And then he creates a monopoly on the railroads, or helps create the railroad monopoly, so people working in that industry as well. All right, Vanderbilt. When we think of Vanderbilt, we need to think about the railroad. One way I tell my on-level students is Vanderbilt the railroad, like he built the railroad. He creates a railroad monopoly. This is the reason he's able to be successful is because at this time, the only form of mass transportation of goods is the railroad, right? Railroad or boats. But once we have railroad to go over land, that's really going to dominate. Since he controls a lot of the railroad lines, he can control what is pushed on these lines and how much he charges them. The big problem with Vanderbilt is that while he is charging big companies low prices so they can move their products, move steel, move lumber, move whatever, he's charging farmers a lot more money. And this is choking out the farming industry because it's costing them more to transport their goods than it is for them to just sell them locally. It almost makes it to where farming is not a profitable business. So he's a pretty ruthless guy too, becomes super wealthy. He employed thousands of people to build the Grand Central Terminal. He pays low wages, long hours. Okay, so if we're seeing a theme here, lots of people are working long hours for very low pay. We talked about Vanderbilt University, I think, before we left on break. Again, pretty lavish lifestyle. The reason that we point out how lavish his lifestyle is because while these capitalists, these entrepreneurs, these big businessmen are living these really, really fancy lifestyles, they're becoming wealthy because they are exploiting other people, because they are taking advantage of the people that work for them. Rather than investing that money back into the folks that are making all the money for them, they kind of hoard it for themselves and live these really fancy lives. He had an indoor pool, which is like almost unheard of in the late 1800s, early 1900s. All right, I already mentioned to you about the Bessemer process. If you didn't write that in your notes, that is something you need to know. The Bessemer process makes the production of steel faster and more economical. It's a way of basically, forming steel quickly with machines. I don't know all of the details of the process itself. What I do know is that, with the Bessemer process, he's able to produce steel on a mass scale at a low price, which means it is gonna be used in all kinds of industries. It is gonna replace wood framing and iron framing. It's gonna replace, the single-story buildings or two-story buildings are now gonna become skyscrapers. We're gonna be able to build the vertical city, with the creation of, or the invention of the Bessemer process. Steam power is used to push, products on, like the, waterways. We're gonna use steam power in boats, but we're also gonna use steam power in textile mills, and other factories that require mechanization. So steam power is gonna be important. In order for steam to be created, you gotta boil water. Essentially, you gotta heat up water. We're gonna use coal to do that. So coal mining becomes a huge industry in order to feed the steam engines. Coal mining is gonna be centered in western Pennsylvania, so this kind of part of Pennsylvania, and northern West Virginia and parts of eastern Ohio. Samuel Morse invents the telegraph, which is gonna revolutionize the way that people communicate. You can send, initially Morse code across the telegraph, which is a series of taps that sends a message. Then Alexander Graham Bell is gonna take that technology of transmitting messages over a wire and use it to create the telephone. This is gonna change a lot of things. This is gonna change the way that we communicate with each other, although it'll be a while before people have phones in their homes. But the big thing is that it's gonna change the way we do business. Now you can do business, you can be out in California making business deals with people on the East Coast, out in Maine or New York or wherever. You can coordinate the movement of products quickly. So the telephone is really gonna help industrialization kind of speed up the development of industry in the United States. Thomas Edison invents the light bulb. Obviously, I think you guys learned that like in elementary school. The reason that the light bulb is important for industrialization, though, is because it allows factories to be open 24 hours a day. Whereas factories prior to the light bulb could only be open during daylight hours, which, as we know, is like shorter during parts of the year and longer during other parts. The light bulb allows those factories to produce goods 24 hours a day. That's gonna double our production, which means it's gonna essentially double our economic output or economic capability, and fuel future industrialization. All right, we talked about immigration. Prior to 1880, most of them come from Northern Europe, so Great Britain, Ireland, Germany, other parts of Western Europe, Spain and France, not as many people. They are mostly Protestant, meaning that they already align with the majority religious values in the United States, except for the Irish. And most of them speak English. So when they arrive in the United States, assimilation is very easy. It's very easy to kind of, melt into American society, if you will. After 1880, immigration changes. And it starts coming from Eastern and Southern Europe, places like Poland, Italy, Austria-Hungary, Greece, and Russia. These immigrants are not going to assimilate as easily. A lot of them are Catholic, which means that, or Orthodox Jew, which means that they do not align with the dominant religion in the United States. Many of them do not speak English, so it's hard to communicate. And they have different kind of cultural norms or social norms. One of the big things in the U.S. at this time is that there is a push to ban alcohol under the kind of temperance movement in the Second Great Awakening and this religious revival. And when you have these people coming in from another culture who drink and they gamble and they don't speak English and it's hard for them to assimilate, Americans begin to fear them. These immigrants are going to be treated pretty poorly because of their differences and how difficult it is for them to assimilate into American culture. During the 1880s is when we see kind of the first emergence of what we call nativism, or a dislike for immigrants. People leave their home countries for many reasons. When we look at push and pull factors for migration of people, oppression, poverty, war, famine, religious and ethnic persecution, chaos, gangs, well, we say gangs now, but back then it would just usually be war. So folks leave their home countries for a variety of reasons. They come to the United States, though, for a certain set of reasons. The United States offers freedom. Okay, you have freedom of expression, freedom of religion, economic freedom, the ability to make as much money as you can possibly make. There is economic opportunity with jobs. You can come here and start working in a factory pretty much right away. And so there is kind of a security in the United States that a lot of people didn't have in their home countries. And then also, if you already had relatives living here, it was super easy for you to come and assimilate into American culture. Immigrants come in through two major ports, mostly, Ellis Island in New York and Angel Island in California. The immigration process is pretty simple. Get on a boat and show up, okay? You just show up here, and we will process you in at Ellis Island. As long as you don't have, like, tuberculosis is the big thing that we don't want spreading around. As long as you don't have tuberculosis or other, like, communicable disease, you pretty much just walk straight in. Like, you're in and out of Ellis Island within a couple of hours, unless you're sick and need to have, like, a hospital stay. The French gift the United States the Statue of Liberty, and we have it in New York Harbor to welcome immigrants into the country. This is the first thing that immigrants coming from Europe see when they arrive here. And at the base of the statue is this poem that says, "Give me your tired, your poor, your huddled masses, yearning to be free. The wretched refuge of your teeming shore. Send these, the homeless, the tempest tossed to me. I lift my lamp beside the golden door." We really are welcoming of immigrants into the country. This is a symbol of the United States as a country of immigrants. But there will be a small group of people who start to push back against immigration, and we will see that kind of evolve over time throughout the entire 1900s. This is an image of what the immigration looks like. Most of the people coming here are very, very poor, and they travel in the steerage, like the compartment on the ship where all of the luggage goes. When they arrive here, they are checked in through Ellis Island. Somehow I messed these pictures up, so I don't think I can change it. Yeah, they're coming up behind there. When they come into Ellis Island, they show some kind of identification, I don't know, birth certificate or a baptismal record from their home country. They're checked through a medical check for tuberculosis or any other types of diseases. Their names are documented on rolls, and then essentially they are released into the country. Most of them are going to settle into communities of other immigrants that are like them. Some of the initial hardships that immigrants are going to face is, first of all, cities have become very overcrowded. With urbanization and industrialization, tons of people have flocked to the cities, particularly cities like New York and Chicago, and there's not a lot of living space, so people end up living in crowded tenements, which I'm going to show you here in just a minute. They're usually poor because they're coming from another country with nothing. They dress differently, they speak differently, sometimes they have a different religion, and they're unfamiliar with American customs. Now, growing up in America, we just think that everybody behaves like we do. But American customs are very different from customs in Europe. Manners, the words that we use, our mannerisms, the way we dress, just very different. It's a culture shock for people coming from somewhere else. Many of them are going to work as unskilled laborers, meaning that they're going to work in like factory jobs or coal mining or some kind of manual labor position for low wages and little pay. And some of them, especially new immigrants, are going to face hostilities. Particularly the Irish are discriminated against for being Catholic because they drink a lot, because they gamble, and because their culture, I think they have a harder time assimilating to American culture. They form ethnic ghettos. So if you think about parts of the city like Little Italy or Chinatown, these immigrants are going to kind of band together, and they do this for kind of logical reasons. You come to a foreign country, you want to be around people who are like you, who understand what you're going through, who understand your culture. These ethnic ghettos basically are little enclaves in the city where immigrants can feel comfortable. They can go to the same church services, they can enjoy the same cuisine, they can share information with each other, and so on. So we start to get these little ethnic kind of enclaves within the cities. The problem is that it makes it a little harder for them to assimilate because they've isolated themselves from mainstream America. That's going to be kind of a source of tension too. Nativists see this. Instead of understanding that they're doing this for their own comfort and because they're kind of in culture shock, some people will believe that they're doing this because they don't want to assimilate and that they want to basically just reestablish their home country within the United States. We expect immigrants to Americanize. If you don't have this in your notes, you do need to know what Americanization is. Americanization is learning to dress and speak and act like other Americans. We talked about this with Native Americans, and I showed you the picture of Tom, who I believe was a Cherokee Indian, before assimilation and after, how we expected the natives to cut their hair and wear English clothes, and kind of take on American culture. We expect the same thing of immigrants. One of the places that assimilation or Americanization happens is in the public school system. So a lot of immigrants are going, children will attend public schools, and the parents can take night classes to learn how to speak English or whatever to assimilate to American culture. We consider the United States a melting pot. That you come here from a foreign country, you are melted down, like we basically melt down or destroy your home culture, and then we mold you into what we want you to be, what you are expected to be as an American. This is controversial. There are arguments that we should not do this to people because we should allow them to practice their own culture. There are people who say you should have to assimilate to American culture if you move here. We kind of in practice do a little bit of both. We do expect immigrants to come here and learn English, understand American like social expectations, but we also, at least now in modern times, celebrate our diversity and appreciate that everybody kind of contributes their own things to our culture. Nativism, which I was talking about just a minute ago, this is something you do need to know because we're going to look at this over and over and over again this year. Nativism is a very, very strong dislike for immigrants and a favoring of American citizens or American, you could almost say Americans first, okay? That we should be concerned with people that are already here, that already live here, that are already Americans, and nativists do not want any further immigration, or at the very best, they want to restrict immigration to just a small amount from particular countries. They believe that immigrants are inferior, that immigrants are inherently different than Americans, that immigrants are incapable of Americanizing or assimilating to American culture. They argued that immigrants took American jobs, particularly in this time period, the Chinese on the West Coast, going into the gold mines and mining all of our precious gold, which is a natural resource. This argument about jobs we see over and over and over again. We're going to see in the 20s, and the 30s, and the 50s, the 70s, and the 90s, the 2000s, the 2010s, the 2020s. This is kind of the fallback argument against immigration. In 1882, this is something you need to know as well if you don't have it already written down. I don't know if we talked about, I don't know if we got this far before we left on Christmas break. We did? Okay. Chinese Exclusion Act is the first federal law to restrict immigration. It essentially bans all new Chinese laborers from coming into the United States, and it prevents any Chinese laborers who are already here from gaining citizenship. This is the very first time that we ever restrict immigration. And from here until 1924, we're not gonna restrict immigration again. But by 1924, we kind of see a resurgence of nativism, after World War I, and kind of in the wake of the first Red Scare. We talked about, okay, now I remember, we did talk a little bit about urbanization, that people are moving into the cities in record numbers, and the cities become overcrowded. This is a photo from, I can't remember the year, 1900, 1903, very early 1900s or late 1800s in New York City. Now it's been colorized because it was black and white, but this is what the streets actually look like. You have street vendors who are selling produce or selling animals, chickens, pigs, sheep, whatever people are eating. You have vendors that are selling fruits and vegetables, potatoes, tomatoes, whatever people are eating. Plus you have horse and buggy that are pulling people and products through New York City. The horses are pooping everywhere. It's a pretty nasty situation, not just because it's crowded, but because it's also unsanitary. We don't have any sanitation system at this time. There's nobody who comes in and cleans the streets and makes sure that everything kind of stays nice and neat. So what we start to see is the spread of disease that can be prevented with just basic sanitation. So we come up with some solutions. How do we get all these people off the street? Well, we build underground subways. I'm way ahead of myself. Anyway, we're gonna build underground subways to get all these people off the street. And I mean, you're still gonna have some. It's not gonna be everybody's gone. There's gonna be some regulation on like food vending and stuff on the street in order just to keep things nice and neat and clean. Urbanization is caused by several different factors. Immigration being one of the big ones, especially on the East Coast, because most of the immigrants coming here are coming in through the East Coast and Ellis Island. The other thing is that industrialization had created many jobs in the cities. So if you had been working out on the farm, you had been a farm hand or helping somebody, a ranch hand, and your farm went under or your farm didn't need your help anymore, you could just move to the city and work in a factory. So we see a lot of families who migrate from the kind of the western part of the country and the southern part of the country into these northeastern cities in order for them to get jobs. So between immigration and the internal migration, we have a lot of people moving into the cities, and this causes overcrowding, and a lot of people are living in these really cramped apartments called tenements. We did talk about tenements, didn't we? Okay, so the tenements are like a one-room apartment with no running water, no electricity, no heat, no air conditioning, etc. Very unsanitary. Remember I told you this is their bathroom and their shower and their laundry room. Okay. It's laundry day, everybody hangs their clothes out. I think this is where we stopped, isn't it? With public services? Okay. So to deal with the overcrowding that's happening up on the roadway, we start to build subways underground. In order to deal with things like a lack of hospitals and police and schools and fire departments and all of these things, cities are going to start to focus on how they can get the funding to take care of these problems. So this, public services, is going to come from wealthy people and a little bit of political corruption, which we'll get to. The subways also are going to be built by some wealthy people and a little bit of political corruption. How many of y'all are familiar with like the mafia or the mob? A little bit? Carson, how does the mob control a city?
Well, I don't know, my great grandfather did.
Okay, Kylie, do you know how the mob controls a city? Anybody know how the mob controls a city? Yes.
They take like protection fees from people.
Okay, so they extort people, right? They, or it's called extortion. They basically say, hey, if you want to build have a business in the city, you're going to pay me for protection. Then they take their money and they invest it in businesses like construction or plumbing or electrical work, whatever business, And then when the city needs something like a subway, guess whose construction company is building the subway? It's the mob, right, or the mafia. What we see is not quite a mob or mafia yet, but runs on the same premise. We get very, very wealthy people, particularly New York is the worst, very wealthy people who are gonna use their money to help the city deal with all of these problems, the lack of hospitals, the lack of police, the lack of fire departments, the lack of school, the lack of public water, street cleaning, garbage collection, subways. These wealthy people are gonna say, hey, my business will go ahead and put this in, but I'm gonna get a kickback from it. I'm gonna make myself some extra money. Instead of charging you what it actually costs, I'm gonna charge you like 1.5 times and make myself wealthier, make myself more important. And that money, which we'll talk about, I don't know if we'll talk about it today, but that money is then used to buy off politicians. And that's a problem. There are also social tensions in the cities because wealthy people don't want to live next to poor people, okay? And poor people don't want to live next to wealthy people. Poor people see the wealthy as kind of almost disgusting. Like, how do you have all this money and you live this lifestyle that's really lavish and elegant, and you're eating steak and lobster, and we're over here begging for scraps. And then the rich don't want to see the poor. They say the poor people are lazy, they're dirty, they're not motivated, they just need to work harder. So we start to see this rising social tension between both the rich and the poor. All right. I'm gonna stop here.
Wait,
We're
can you
gonna
go back one slide then?
Yeah, we'll pick up political machines tomorrow because I want to make sure I have time to explain it well.